If you're anything like me, you've probably spent a few hours poking around on Google Earth before stumbling across something that gives you more questions than answers. A massive white field that looks like a snowy desert visible from space in the south of Spain. A tiny village in the middle of nowhere in Belarus that shares its name with one of Earth's most well-known cities. A plane crash in the forest in the middle of the remote Russian wilderness. Well, today I'm taking you through 6 weird but interesting things on Google Earth. So let's get started. So number 1. In Spain's south you'll find a city called Almería. Lots of pretty beaches, a castle and some interesting streets here. But scroll a bit west on Google Earth and you'll find a huge white sea. We can see that it's grown on historical view from 1984. This is South Spain, so it's definitely not snow. It's actually a vast sea of greenhouses called El Mar del Plástico, where cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers and melons are grown. Before, this place was basically just dry scrubland that few local farmers worked on. In the 1940s though, it was known that Almeria's soil could be fertile, but a lack of water and small population held the agriculture here back. Farming here was basically only to keep your family or village going, no more. But Spain had a vision for this place. The thing is, Almería is an ideal place for this kind of thing. It gets a ton of sunlight hours, they get short and mild winters, and it's pretty flat, so plants could thrive there. The only thing they need is more rain. That's why they decided to build this project to make a microclimate. The green light came when one farmer decided to mulch his crops one harvest with beach sand, which led to a much bigger harvest. Local growers then sharpened this process over time by trying different thicknesses of manure, compost and sand for different crops, and it worked even better. So in 1963, the first greenhouse went up. It protected the crops from wind and kept moisture in, and so lengthened the growing season to harvest earlier and more often. Other growers followed suit after seeing the success, and plenty more greenhouses went up. Over time, the process became even more efficient with things like drip irrigation systems to use less water. Now, the plastic sea accounts for 18% of Spain's agricultural exports. Sadly, the plastic makes for a lot of waste that needs to be dealt with properly. The water usage is still a bit much despite the drip irrigation system, and lots of toxic pesticides are used there. On top of that, underneath the greenhouses, the temperature can reach 45 degrees Celsius, which has led to work protests and strikes, so these are ongoing problems to sort out. Moving on to number 2, here's a place you've probably never thought about in your life. If you poke around Belarus on Google Earth, you might find little Vitebsk Oblast. If you zoom in a bit further there to see the place names within it, you might come across a peculiar little place called Paris. There are very few photos of Paris or Paris on Google Street View, but you can see that it's just a very typical Belarusian village. Some brick blocks, some old Soviet ladders, allotments. And you can also have a look at their funny replica Eiffel Tower. So what's the story behind this run-of-the-mill Belarusian village being called Paris then? I found an interview from a few workers at the village's only shop, which is also called Paris itself. They say that the name's origin is a local folktale. Supposedly, Napoleon himself came through in 1812 while a war between France and Russia was happening. He looked out at the surroundings and said it was like Paris, giving the village its name. Apparently the villagers then answered him, saying, "Well, you can call it that if you want, as long as you leave our cows alone, mate," though the French then took the cows for their army. However, according to local historian Castus Schital, this is all a big lie. Castus says Napoleon did come around this area, but he didn't come to the village itself, since the roads back then that Napoleon travelled on didn't come near to the village. The name supposedly comes from a local landowner who called it that randomly. The article is actually a really funny read. The villagers seem to be constantly taking the piss out of themselves by saying any day now they'll be flooded with tourists, especially French ones, but they don't have any bakeries with French pastries because they lack the funds. The village also used to have its own museum, which the locals also funnily called the Louvre. Funnily enough, the Soviets didn't like the village's foreign name, and in 1973 they renamed it to Novodrutsk, though in 2006 the villagers successfully asked for it to be changed back to Paris. And shortly after this, the Eiffel Tower replica was built. And it seems that this is not the only Paris in the former Soviet Union. There's another one in Chelyabinsk in Russia named Paris in celebration in the mid-1800s after some Russian war victories in Europe. They also have their own Eiffel Tower, a sixth of the size of the real one, which doubles up as a phone network mast. Minsk itself also had its own little Eiffel Tower with its own interesting story. It was apparently put up around late 2012, but in 2020 there was a lot of drama over it. Anti-government activists kept painting it in the anti-government BKB Belarusian flag colours in protest. The city officials kept painting back over it with white paint, but the activists painted over it again, so in November 2020 it was pulled down and chopped up to pieces. Weird Google Earth finding number 3 time. The Maldives is a network of beautiful atolls just peeking above the sea surface, a well-known holiday destination for many. However, zoom in on its southmost atoll and onto Mulikolhua Island and you'll find something a bit weird. A very clear SOS symbol that wasn't there before 2023 and another one from 2023 not far away here. So was this a group of distressed stranded tourists trying to survive on a faraway remote Maldives atoll, lost after their boat forgot them on an outing? Sadly, the real tale is not quite as exciting. Even if there were tourists stranded on this island, it's within just a few kilometres of inhabited places. It's not like they couldn't have just swum around and found this house with a swimming pool to ask for help, for example. The second sign is literally right next to an airport, so they'd be pretty crap castaways if they couldn't get themselves out of that situation without resorting to putting up an SOS message for planes to see. This was likely just someone in the Maldives mucking about for a prank to have a laugh. Finding number 4 now, another place that truly fascinates me is northern Russia. Swathes of nothing but lakes, hills and forest for miles and miles. I also like to look at the random towns and villages with no street view coverage and seemingly nothing else around them. I always wonder what's going on there. One particular example of this are 2 towns, Karyalach and Olenyok, with only a few pictures and videos of them if you search for them in Russian. While the villages themselves are interesting, something else might catch your eye down here. Follow the Olenyok River down a bit from the villages and look at what we see on one of the river bends. Undeniably a crashed aircraft. Luckily, it's not such a tragedy as it might seem. In June of 2022, a 1970 Antonov cargo plane was being flown towards Olenyok Airport for landing, but they had to do a forced landing after running out of fuel due to a technical failure. The 7 crewmen inside the aircraft all survived the crash. They were hospitalised in the nearby Olenyok Hospital, one of them with an open shin wound along with rib and chest fractures, while the others were just bruised and concussed. A lucky escape. The authorities went looking for the plane after they lost radar contact with it and found it, and it was written off as a total hull loss and left in the forest. For finding number 5, we come to Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, Latin America's 3rd biggest city with its gigantic grid systems stretching for miles and miles and the mighty Rio de la Plata next to it, splitting Argentina and Uruguay. If you follow the Rio de la Plata upstream a bit to find the Paraná River and zoom in at just the right spot, you'll find a circular island in a circular lake. This odd little spinning island is called El Ojo, and it's literally just a floating island. There are plenty of these in the world. There's actually another one here in Lake Parashar in India that also moves. The reason they're circular comes down to undersurface currents that spin the island slowly, leading to the edges bashing into the lakesides and rounding them off over time. A similar thing happens with ice, which you can see here in Maine's Presumpscot River. Ice gets caught in eddy currents, spins around and gets shaped into a disc because of it. The first guy to spot this place was Sergio Noispiller from Argentina when they were filming for Paranormal Activity in the area. They went to look at it, which you can see in the video they filmed, though they didn't manage to get much success out of it because the place is basically swampland and is very hard to trudge through. And the last finding, number 6. Country borders are something else I enjoy looking at on Google Earth because they often feature weird shapes that make me wonder why they look that way. The border between the USA and Mexico here in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez seems normal enough, but zoom out a little bit and move east and we see something strange. Near the towns of Horizon City and Agua Dulce, we see lots of road grid systems laid out like typical American suburbs, but there aren't any houses on them. Now, the easiest explanation would be that it's just a new housing development underway, But on Google Earth Historical View, we can see that they've been there as far back as 1985. So it turns out that this little piece of land was the result of a big land investment drive dating back to 1962. 27,000 people worldwide invested in plots here. A company named Horizon Corp were responsible for building on it and pocketed millions in profit, yet to this day nothing has been built there. The reason why is because of Texas laws. They built the roads and sold the land, but they didn't build any infrastructure there properly. In the 80s, they got served a few class action lawsuits for disreputable practices because of it. In this article, one investor said that the land he bought there for $1,000 is now worth a mere $2. The worst part is that it can't even be sold due to the Texas Colonial Law Act of 1994, which forbids sale of land under 10 acres. Even if you did invest in more than 10 acres here, you still can't get rid of it. The same law also states that you have to provide sewage, water and utilities in order to sell the land, which obviously doesn't exist there yet. There are no water lines here and no utilities, only main roads built, which flood when it rains. And as a bonus, we have two more interesting little things you can see on Google Earth or Street View that didn't make the final script. There's a trail you can follow on Street View in the United Arab Emirates, where the Google camera was actually mounted on a camel's back. In certain places, you can see flying objects in motion on satellite view. Flying aeroplanes like this one in the Florida Everglades and this one here in Ireland. Here you can actually see a B-52 bomber flying near Missouri. Here you can see a satellite in motion. And that's the list for today. A plastic greenhouse sea big enough to see from space, a Belarusian village called Paris, a couple of prank SOS signs in the Maldives, a lucky plane crash in the middle of nowhere, Russia, a floating spinning circular island, and a road network waiting for houses since the 1960s. Most of them you'd fly right over without a second thought, but stop to dig a bit and you find the story behind them. The map is still full of little secrets. If you've got a strange spot of your own that you've always wondered about, drop the coordinates in the comments and I'll have a look at it. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.